I'm Jill Rowe, and in this episode of the Different Podcast, Steve Chalke and I talk about Oasis Restore, the first ever secure school in this country. Built on a trauma-informed therapeutic model, we chat about believing that relentless love underpins everything and recognise that this approach should always be the approach. So how do we make relentless love our strategy when others believe that love is easy and soft? Together we explore and unpack how relentless love is, in fact, the hardest way and the best way, helping to create connection, belonging and safety. This is a revolution in the justice system, and this conversation explains why. Steve Chalke, we're back.
We are.
Another episode of the Different Podcast.
Yeah.
Very exciting.
Right back where we've always been.
I know. Here we are in this room.
Sitting, chatting.
Surrounded by bits of fruit today.
Bits of fruit, cup of tea and some cables.
Yeah. Very fortunate. Very fortunate. You were just telling me that you're going to get some new glasses.
I am going to get some new glasses, and my wife came all the way from home. She walked to our offices earlier today at lunchtime, so that she could go to the opticians and choose the new frames with me, because I think she's a bit scared.
Yeah, exactly.
With the ones that she's got to live with.
She does not trust your taste.
And then, having done that, she asked me if we could have lunch together, but it's terrible because she's so wonderful. And I just had to say, I have got so many phone calls to make.
Poor corny.
Yeah. So anyway, off she went to
look after the grandkids.
Do something else. Yeah, perhaps. So I was just thinking, she is wonderful and very long suffering.
She is. She's brilliant.
Incredible, really.
Steve, it's great to be talking to you again. And I think what we're going to talk about is something we were both, I felt very privileged to be there. You've made it happen. But the other day, you and I and a whole crowd of other people, which was amazing.
Including Cornelia.
Cornelia.
She came to that, which is wonderful. Yeah.
We were at the pre-opening of Oasis Restore.
Yeah. The pre-opening of Oasis Restore, which is the country's first secure school, the first time a charity has ever been allowed in law to run a custodial establishment. So young people up to the age of 18, perhaps 19, because government are pushing that limit for various reasons, will a judge and jury can send them to us rather than sentencing them to somewhere like Feltham, a youth offending institution. And we are built, Oasis Restore, the country's first secure school, around a trauma-informed therapeutic model. Yeah. So the question isn't, what have you done wrong? And let's punish you for it. It's what's happened to you, and let's unpack that so that you find a different pathway through life. So what it is, in fact, is the way I always say, it's a revolution in youth justice, because it's justice practice catching up with what we now know about brain science, childhood, adolescent development. So it's justice catching up with the 21st century.
And it was amazing. And it was fascinating. I mean, it's brilliant, Steve. But what was also amazing was watching the impact of the story that was being told by everything that happened on that day, the pre-opening, that everyone was picking up on. So this notion of love being the underpinning point of everything that's happening there, it was incredible.
It was incredible. It was a wonderful, wonderful day, and probably about 100 people there, weren't there? And they were judges and magistrates and people who work in the justice system and people who work in the education system and youth workers and et cetera, as well as government ministers, etc. But everyone was there celebrating this breakthrough. It really is a revolution because it's about love. In fact, I think I probably told the story, because I normally do, about being asked by somebody in the House of Lords, actually, at one point, what our strategy would be. And that was the first time I said, well, our strategy is love, to your point. And they looked at me really shocked, actually. And they said, love? And what? And I said, well, nothing, just love. And then I said, relentless love, love that never gives up. relentless love. That is our strategy. And they pushed me and questioned me about it. And the basis of that thinking was that, you know, love's a bit sloppy, isn't it? It's a bit soft. It's a bit mamby-pamby. I mean, you know.
Bit hippie, Steve.
Yeah, a bit hippie, a bit, you know, it's all over the place, isn't it? Flower power and all of that. And what we need is some rigor. And you got to get tough on crime and tough on its causes. And of course, we don't get tough on its causes at all, because its causes are rejection. Its causes are trauma. Its causes are neglect. Its causes are violence. Its causes are abandonment and abuse. Its causes are, I'm a neurodiverse thinker, and the school system I'm in and the society I'm in makes me feel like I'm an outsider. I don't feel wanted, and I don't feel understood, and I feel like I'm a failure. And its causes are children that are abandoned, you know, almost getting on for, I should say, half of the children in any kind of secure establishment, you know, they've been convicted by a court to a sentence in our country. Getting on for half of them come from looked after backgrounds. That is, they've been fostered, pushed from pillar to post, from pillar to post. They've never settled. They've not been loved. They've not been loved. They've not been shown kindness. They've not felt safe at any point in their life. And so their antisocial behavior, as we see it, is actually just normal behavior for someone in that situation. As I often say, you probably heard me say before, all behavior is communication, and you're communicating your inner hatred of yourself, your loathing of yourself, your loathing of life, your fear, your anger. It's all bottled up inside. So until we deal with the drivers of that behavior, the causes of that behavior, we get nowhere. You can repress people's behavior, but then it's going to explode somewhere else. And that's a therapeutic approach to ask, explore with us what triggers you, you know, et cetera, et cetera.
I was thinking about it. It's actually to do with one of your grandchildren. So when I saw Zephyr, great name.
Oh, yeah.
When I saw Zephyr on Sunday.
He's 2.
He's nearly 3.
He's nearly 3, keeps telling me. In fact, he thinks he is 3 because he thinks the whole month is his birthday.
He's a smart kid.
Yeah, he's a very smart kid.
Told me he wanted a horse for his birthday. I was like, tricky. When I called round at their house, I walked in and he just ran towards me with this great big smile. And it really made me think about some of the things that you've been saying around attachment theory and how young people and children get greeted, what that creates in them, and that sense of connectedness and belonging and safety, and that realization of, you've just been saying that there's this mass of young people and children and adults in the world who've just never known that anyone has wanted them.
So there's a lot of thinking around all of that, isn't there? And I'm sure you know there's a British psychiatrist called John Bowlby, who was very famous in the middle of the 20th century in our country. And he's the guy who did lots of work on what we call attachment theory, which sounds very complicated and very, you know, scary and all of that. But all it really means is that in childhood, I mean, the story you tell about little Zephyr kind of fits in with it. But, you know, I've got another little grandson called Arlo, and Arlo's mum is called Alice. He's in another kind of Chalke family, if you see what I mean. And Arlo's just a tiny smidgen younger than Zephyr. And I've watched Arlo over the years. Alice is a great mum, and Arlo, he's a lovely little lad. And what he does, he'll hang around Alice's skirt, you know, hanging onto her knees and all this kind of stuff. That's his safe place. And then he ventures out into a room. He gets his confidence going, and he ventures out and he starts playing with all the toys or whatever, and then, you know, starts talking to other people or listening to them and all that. And then every now and then you can see he gets a tiny bit nervous, and then he runs back and he clings to his mum's ankles again, and then he gets his confidence up, and he ventures out again. And that is a fantastic example of what John Bowlby called secure attachment theory, because what John Bowlby said was your primary caregiver, often a mother, but not necessarily a mother, but your primary caregiver in those first years of your life is where you get your sense of security from, if all goes well. And therefore, it's like a safe harbor for you. And if you think of your attachment to your primary caregiver and primary caregivers, as the safety in your life, then you learn to venture out of the harbor. And then you come back when the sea's getting a bit choppy and you find security there. And that's how a child develops. But when you don't have that safe beginning, that safe harbor, when people aren't there for you, and that could be for all sorts of reasons, a mum or a dad who's so taken up with their own struggles in life for one reason or the other, emotionally, in terms of their mental health, in terms of their finances, that all of their energy is consumed by the fight to survive, that they don't have time to invest in the child who doesn't then feel secure, and it becomes an insecure attachment. And there are various types of those. So, there's a parent who's just never there, and John Bowlby called it avoidant attachment. And there's the parent that's sometimes there and sometimes not. And sometimes when they're there, they got time for you. And sometimes when they're there, they're consumed by something else. And he called that ambivalent or anxious attachment. And you never know where you are with someone, et cetera, et cetera. And there are various other ways of thinking about this. But what he was basically saying is that gets baked into you. And if you have secure attachments in life, you go out into the world with confidence, whether it's the room or as you grow older. And he says you internalize your model of attachment and it gives you the confidence in the big world. But if that attachment hadn't been good, it makes you scared or it makes you really aggressive. You're always aggressive because you're being defensive. So everything is based on that. And the kind of children that we will go, or young people, children that will be with us in Oasis Restore are, as we all know, all the research shows, these are the children that we lock up, and they're children who've not had good attachment for one reason or the other, who have been fostered and shunted around. And you can be fostered and it can be brilliant, but loads of kids get shunted from pillar to post and they don't know where they fit. Or because you're neurodivergent, as I said, you feel that you don't fit, you don't feel secure, you don't feel safe. Or because you're poor. The point is, wealthy families or middle-class families can spend more of their time with their children, reading to them, playing football to them, joining a club with them or whatever. Whereas a family that's on the breadline has to just fight for survival a lot of the time. And disproportionately, those families in our country are black and brown. We don't like it, but it's true. We try to deny it, but it's true. And so you get the combination of children who've been traumatized, children who've been looked after or not looked after. Biggest oxymoron, isn't it? Looked after child means not looked after child most of the time. From these different categories, and those are the people that are in custodial care and they need love, which is why we're doing Relentless Love.
Which is brilliant. And that's so helpful, the way you've explained all of that. I was just wondering, though, how will that actually show itself, that creating positive, healthy attachment within the context of Oasis Restore? Because the things that I saw were not what I would expect to see if it was a place where you were, we are, it is a secure site and all the rest of it, but everything was so different to what you imagine it should be.
Yes.
And I know that there's every one of those things that is being done is because of what you've just talked about. So, well, I didn't see any bars.
No. So,
on windows.
So for instance, there are no wings because in a YOI, in a youth offending institution, in a youth jail or in a jail, you have a wing, don't you? And then you have a cell on the wing, and the cell has an iron door and big keys.
Yeah.
The door gets slammed and you have bars on the window so you can't escape. And you have lino on the floor which isn't attractive, and gloss
Peeling
paint on the
and-
walls, and etc., etc. And now all of that is traumatizing. So at the end of the day, long day, you go home, you cannot relax in a room with bars, gloss paint, strip lighting, and a hard plastic chair. So, the way I've said it, I mean, it's been put together by a team, but the way I'd say it is, if I wouldn't like to sleep in this bedroom, why should anyone else sleep in this bedroom? So we don't have wings, we have student flats. We don't have cells, we have, they look like student bedrooms.
Great.
Which is really good. We don't have iron doors, we don't have bars, we have windows, unbreakable glass. Of course, we don't have guards. We have youth workers and teachers. We don't have uniforms for everyone. We don't have keys and like that. It's all very secure because these young people will have committed violent crime. They're dangerous to themselves and can be dangerous to others. But it's about bringing calm. Back to my wife, Cornelia. Because at lunchtime when I said to her, thanks for coming to choose your glasses with me, and I'm afraid I can't stop and we can't have lunch because I've got all these calls to make and I've got to get them in before 2:00 when I've got to go into another meeting and all this kind of stuff. She's brilliant, but she say to me often, she knows the more stressed I am, the more stupidly I behave. The more stressed I am, the more likely I am to say something I regret, or like, why didn't I take that opportunity, etc., etc. So the more stressed we are, the more we let words out and sentences out and phrases out and responses that we think, we do stupid things. Now imagine being a child who, because they've never been securely attached, they've never felt love, they've never felt peace, lives in that state of hypertension the whole time. That's why, all behaviour is communication. And we see it as antisocial and aggressive, but it's normally born out of fear.
Yeah. So I'm thinking how short-sighted it is of us as a society to be so preoccupied with this notion of punishment when restoration and love is the way through it all.
Yes, for us all.
Yeah.
As we know. But people will say, to your point earlier, love is a bit mamby-pamby, grow up. Yeah. And that's been put to me very often. But what I say is, what's easier? Sticking a child in a cell and slamming an iron door shut, which, by the way, in prisons, it's the iron door slamming that traumatise people. Endless, banging. Yeah. But if you lock a child in a room, well, what skill does that take? How hard is that? You've locked the door. You need the skill to turn the key, I guess. And then you're going to have a cup of tea.
Yeah.
What's really hard is not to lock the child in, but to sit with the child who basically is going to test you out. They've never been loved. They've never trusted anyone. Why should they trust you? They've just had their freedom taken away. They've been sentenced to us by a judge. Their freedom is gone, and we are part of the establishment. So they're not going to walk in and go, "Hey, it's so glad to be here. Yeah, isn't this going to be fun?"
After me.
Yeah. So you've got to win their trust, and you do that through relationship, and you do that by spending time with them, love. And like any child, they test that out. That's what a toddler does, doesn't it? Yeah. They test it out. Do you really love me? And when somebody realizes I'm actually secure, then they can venture out in life. So it's a tough thing. Now, people also say, well, how do you know? Because Oasis had never done this before. But as you'll know, Jill, way back in the mid-'80s, the first thing I established when Oasis began, it's where Oasis got its name, was a house for kids who were on the street, care leavers, etc., in Peckham, which we still run.
Yeah.
And 16 young people came to live, and the same kind of young people, but not convicted of anything. Didn't mean they'd not committed crimes, But again, young people who hate themselves and have never been seen as anything more than a number or a case by all sorts of statutory services and, everyone. They've not been loved by their parents. I was talking to a guy the other day, actually, who's he never knew his father, and his mother was an addict who never spent any time with him because she was so possessed with feeding her addiction, and that was to do with her own lack in her childhood. And he literally sat next to me. He said, I've always been a number, always been a case. And he was telling me about somebody who he met for the first time in his life. He's changed, turned around. And it was just that he met this person who loved him. Who saw him. And that's what security is about.
Yeah, I was just thinking that this pushback that you've had over this and many other things, but also it's often like I've literally just been in a conversation with a whole group of new leaders in Oasis. We were talking about the Oasis 9 habits, which are these 9 words we use to describe a way of being human in the world based on St. Paul and the fruit of the Spirit. And the conversation began because someone asked a question and said, the trouble with this is it just comes over as, if you're not careful, it's just about being nice. And I said, well, at one level, it is about being nice. But I said, take me to a community where there's been a stabbing and start to explore with the person there who says, do you know, I'm not going to take revenge and I'm actually going to lean into what it means to forgive. I said, that's not easy or soft, or that's the real graft of love, isn't it? This is about Oasis Restore, and it is about everything that's been shaped there. But it's also this tough route of loving, relentless loving is the power that changes the world, right?
It's the power that changes the world, and it's a really hard thing to do, isn't it? Because we all say, oh, this is mamby-pamby and it's easy until we've got beef with someone, until we don't like someone, and then slag them off behind their backs and talk them down and refuse to forgive them. That's the easy thing, because you're just caving into your animal instinct.
Anyone can do that stuff.
Yeah. So it's so hard to build a bridge. It's so hard to go first. It's so hard to say sorry. It's so hard to sit down with someone. It's so hard to spend time giving yourself to another person. We talk about this very professionally now. When Oasis began and that hostel that I'm talking about, all I knew was the fact, I probably talked about it before, these kids arrived and instead of being grateful, they wouldn't even look at me. And I slowly worked out that my frustration with it was my problem, because I realised that they had wounds in their heads somehow, wounded on the inside. But of course, we now know that that's a trauma. We call it trauma. And I'm having this conversation, and we talk about therapeutic care. And I think that, I often say recently, again, because of Restore, I say the term trauma, it sounds very professional, and therapeutic care sounds very, I suppose that must be very, that's a bit,
need a qualification to understand
a bit
that.
mystical, but you need to be, several degrees to be therapeutic and all that kind of stuff. But trauma is it's a Greek word actually, and it just means wound, which is why hospitals have trauma units. You go when you go a wound, you see. Trauma just means wound, nothing more. It means wound. And therapy or therapeutic comes, the root of that is from a Greek word which means to heal, healing. And so that trauma is wounding and therapy is healing. And in life, when you think about it, everything is either wounding or healing. Every experience, every encounter, every relationship, every day can be a wounding one or a healing one. Every meal, a wounding one or a healing one. Every conversation, a wounding or a healing one. So being therapeutic, it turns out, isn't that hard. No. It's about, like people say, is it about being nice? It is. It's about being generous.
Yeah.
It's about being other-centered. It's about being compassionate. It's these things.
And in doing those things, Steve, my sense is that it enables you to seek to understand the trauma of others. When you live through that lens of being other-centered, and when you allow compassion to be your posture and the humility to listen,
Yeah, and
it causes you to see the other person like your friend.
Yeah. So, because of the setting up of Restore, which we've been working on, you could say for 14 years, you could say for in a kind of frenetic sense, or I'm not sure that's the right word, but every day we've been working on this for 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
But I've been working on it for 14 years or so. The truth is, over that time, I've had so many conversations with people who've been in prison, young people who've got into huge amounts of trouble and ended up inside, serving time, as, however you want to put it. And every time, as you unpack a story, it's one of neglect. Every single time, it's one of not being wanted, being rejected, being left on your own, being abused sexually, physically. It's one of being laughed at and bullied and beaten and raped, and it's and shunted from pillar to post, and no one wanting you, and it burns into you. We now know, of course, because of neuroscience, because of MRI scanners, I always say that, we've probably talked about it before, because we can now see into a human brain, we can now see the way that these kind of behaviours, sometimes they get called ACEs, don't they? Yeah, adverse childhood experiences. But we can now see how all of this adverse childhood experience changes the shape of the development of the brain. So it's a science thing. It's not because this young person, needs a good slap and that'll sort them out, or, they need locking outside the classroom. Let's keep them in detention for a month. That will sort them out. It won't sort them out. And it doesn't sort them out. It ingrains it. And that's a very hard thing. We employ in Oasis, as you know, loads of education. It's a really hard thing for people to understand who think that a good detention's really going to help someone. They may cave in and become compliant, but you've not dealt with the inner stuff. You only do that through love. You do that through listening. I'm not knocking. I mean, all our staff and staff in schools around the country are stripped of resource, because you've got to have time for this. I know myself, I've got 10 grandchildren. It's finding time. It's time to sit there. You ache for the fact that spending time with someone is the healing thing. It's the therapeutic thing. So as a society, we got to, and big picture, invest in the young, because when you don't invest in young people, you pay for it. They pay for it, first of all, and then society pays for it over and over and over and over again. Do you know, it's well into the 90%. It goes up and down a bit, but it's in the top. It's more than 95%. I can never remember what it is this month as opposed to last month. More than 95% of all adults in prison were once in youth detention and once excluded from school.
So the system's been really working well then.
Exactly. So the people that come along say, let's get tough. Yeah. Hey, we tried all that, and it's costing society a fortune. We spent £20 billion on reconvictions last year. Just reconvictions, reoffending.
It's just... So relentless love is our way, Steve. And we believe there's no lost cause.
No lost cause. And
tell us a story about an acorn.
Exactly. So that's what I was going to tell you, or you've heard me tell it before, because I think it's such a perfect illustration of all this. So, what I say, well, you have been talking about this the other day. So every acorn has the potential to become an oak tree. a mighty oak tree under which people shelter.
Mm.
But whether that acorn fulfills its potential is dependent on a number of things. First of all, it has to fall into rich soil, deep soil, well irrigated soil.
Mm.
I can never say that word first off. It needs nutrition.
Yeah.
If it falls into soil that can sustain it, it begins to grow. But as it grows, it needs to be buffeted from the wind and the storms. It needs other trees around it that are bigger and stronger. And that helps it stand. Every acorn can become an oak tree, but it's dependent on all of the support systems that sit around it in order for it to reach its potential. And in society, for us as human beings, exactly the same is true. Just as our lungs need air, so we as human beings also need love. We need security. We need to feel safe. We need to be soothed and comforted when we're struggling. And if we receive those things, we can grow into our potential. But without them, we will always struggle.
The revolution of relentless love. Thank you, Steve.